I'm Angela Willis, and in this episode of Women That Kill, we look at Erica Sheppard, who was convicted of murdering a 43-year-old woman in her home to steal the victim's car. This case helps us understand the Texas death penalty system and its weaknesses. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe and like this video. Erica Sheppard was an African American woman. She was born on September 1st, 1973, in Bay City, Texas. She completed high school. At the age of 19, Erica was already the mother of 3 young children. She was unemployed and in an abusive relationship with the father of her children. Erica and her 10-month-old child moved to Houston to live with her older brother, Jonathan. Her brother had a live-in boyfriend named James Dickerson, also 19 years old. Erica soon became homesick, but she did not have any money or transportation to get back to Bay City. On the evening of June 29, 1993, Erica, James, and another friend, Corey, were sitting around their Houston apartment when James popped off that he needed some money and was willing to jack some cars and some people to get it. James asked Erica for help. He promised to give her part of the money and she could use the stolen car to drive to Bay City to visit her friends. On June 30th, 1993, Erica and James put their plan into motion. They looked for possible victims outside of the apartment complex where they were staying. They saw Marilyn Meager, a 43-year-old Caucasian woman, transferring packages from her black Mazda 626. Marilyn was a real estate agent and had 2 children. Erica and James decided to go into the apartment and rob Marilyn and steal the Mazda. Seeing that Marilyn had left her apartment door open, they snuck inside and waited for her to return with the remaining packages. Once inside, James and Erica jumped Marilyn. James held her down, but the woman kept screaming. Erica handed him a knife she had brought with her, and James shouted that he would slit her throat if she didn't shut up. When Marilyn refused their demands and wouldn't stop yelling, James tried to cut her throat. Only the knife Erica brought wasn't sharp enough. Erica ran into the kitchen and pulled out a butcher knife, then ran back to James and handed it to him. Next, she went into the woman's bedroom, rummaging through her things, finding some money and car keys. James called out for Erica and she returned, only to find blood gushing from the woman's throat. She was still breathing, and James told Erica to hold the woman down, which she did, as he reached for a plastic bag, placed it over the woman's face, and tried to suffocate her. While the woman was still gasping for air, James wrapped a bed sheet around her, then grabbed a 10-pound statue off the glass table. While Erica held her down, James smashed it over the victim's head. Erica and James left. One of Marilyn's daughters found her body and called the police. Because Erica and James committed the murder at the same apartment complex they stayed at, the police were able to quickly get leads. An acquaintance of Erica provided police with the information that led them to Erica. On June 30th, 1993, while being interrogated, Erica gave a full confession. She revealed what happened to Marilyn. Erica admitted to police that she was there for the crime and did nothing to prevent it, but she did not stab or beat the woman. When asked why they killed Marilyn, when they could have just overpowered the victim and taken the keys and money and left, Erica's only response was that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had no other explanation why Marilyn was killed. During the trial, the prosecutors used Erica's own confession against her. A fingerprint expert also testified that Erica's bloody handprint was found on the scene of the crime, only the blood wasn't Erica's, it was the victim's. The prosecution's case was further bolstered by the testimony of Corey, the friend of Erica, who was in the apartment when Erica and James the night before. The pair had planned the robbery and discussed their willingness to kill if necessary. Erica could not afford a lawyer. She was represented at trial by a court-appointed lawyer, Charles Brown, who had never been a lead counsel in a death penalty case. The 2 other lawyers appointed to assist him had even less experience than he did. Brown barely put up a defense, and the jury had little trouble finding Erica guilty of capital murder. She was convicted of murder and robbery and sentenced to death row on April 25, 1995. This has been one of the major complaints about the Texas death penalty is that almost all the people on Texas death row are from lower classes and could not afford their own legal defense. Under Texas law, for a person to be sentenced to death, the jury in the punishment phase of the trial must answer yes to 3 questions. Number 1, did the defendant act deliberately? Number 2, was the defendant's conduct unreasonable in response to any provocation offered by the deceased? Number 3, was there a probability that the defendant will commit future acts of violence that would pose a continued threat to society? If the jury answered no to any one of these questions, the defendant will be sentenced to life in prison. In Erica's punishment phase, the prosecution called 11 witnesses, the first being Corey Jordan, who testified that on the evening before the murder, he saw Erica and James try to rob another woman in the complex, but they gave up their attempt when the woman ran into the apartment and locked the door. Paula Allen, the ex-wife of Erica's current boyfriend, testified that Erica convinced Paula's boyfriend to meet her out on the street. When he did, a car came by and shot at him. Paula believed that Erica was setting her boyfriend up to be killed. 2 of Erica's jailmates then were called to testify. They told the jury that Erica bragged about the murder of Marilyn after news accounts of the crime aired on TV at the Harris County Jail. Based on these testimonies, the death sentence was given. People sentenced to death can appeal the judgment. Frustrated by the appeals process, on November 7, 1997, Erica wrote a letter to the appellate court asking that her appeal be immediately stopped and her execution date be carried out as promptly as possible. Complying with Erica's wishes, the trial court scheduled her execution date on April 20, 1998. While in prison, Erica became a born-again Christian. She would only change her mind, she told her mother, if she received some sign, some miracle indicating that God wanted her to live. The Reverend Jesse Jackson visited Erica 1 week before she was scheduled to die and infused her with a new zest for life. A new team of lawyers was assembled and the fight for Erica's life was renewed. Currently, Erica is 32 years old and is on death row. Her execution was not carried out and it was postponed, and she continues to appeal her case on death row. If I can get the killer's birth date, I like to look at their zodiac sign to kind of give more insight into who this person is. Erica was born September 1st, 1973. That makes her a Virgo. Virgos are known for being perfectionists. They're usually very helpful, and they're the first to offer themselves to do favors. They are hard workers, honest, and reliable. Some negative things about Virgos is that they can be judgmental, critical, and fussy. But they're known for being intelligent, but because of their introverted nature, they can sometimes have trouble expressing themselves. They are aware of the laws of survival, but they also have their own limits. Sometimes they should not play with fate, but be content with what they already. But for this, it is necessary to learn to say to yourself, stop. So they need to tell themselves to stop in order to prevent a catastrophe. Virgos actively seek out messes, physical or interpersonal, emotional, in order to fix them, and their heads are filled with constant anxiety. I think these characteristics relate very closely to Erica. The original idea of robbing and possibly killing was James, but Erica offered to help. Literally, the line of the description of Virgos is to tell yourself to stop in order to prevent a catastrophe. Actively seeking out messes seems to fit with her life completely. Like this really, oh my gosh, Erica is such a Virgo. It's very interesting how these zodiac readings go. But that is all for today. If you want to learn more about women that kill, check out some of my other videos. I will put the playlist down below. Don't forget to come back tomorrow for a new episode of Women That Kill. Have a great day.